The next day, the first thing waiting for me when I arrived at school was an envelope in my shoe locker. I knew it. I quickly stuffed it into my pocket before anyone else noticed, then hurried to the bathroom after changing into my school slippers. That's right, I was the walking cliché of the guy who opens a secret letter in the bathroom stall. I opened the envelope and took out the folded sheets within. There were two. The first one was obviously written by her, and on it was written the following. At the intersection of X and Y, proceed south until you find an unpaved alley. Please leave the object at that intersection, as directed on the map, between 6:12 and 6:15 p.m. P.S. Do not forget to bring Mikuru Asahina with you. That was as far as I could read. At the end of the note, there were some symbols I'd never seen before, but I had no idea what they meant. I wonder if they were a signature of some kind, but in any case, the letter was completely incomprehensible, and I tilted my head in confusion. What kind of orders are these anyway? The moment I looked at the second sheet, things only got worse. What the hell? The bizarre thing came with a diagram. Even if I flattened it by calling it simplified, it was well outside the range of good. The intersection was marked with an X, and the diagram beside that X had to be a joke. I don't get any of this, Asahina. Did she really want me to put this stuff on a spot indicated with 3 minutes of 6:12 this evening? What would even be the point? I reread the letter several times until I memorized it, then shoved it down into the depths of my bag. I absolutely could not let Haruhi see it. This was one thing I'd never be able to think up a good excuse for. I left the bathroom and ascended the stairs, deep in thought. This much was becoming clear. Asahina had been sent back from 8 days in the future because of this. There was something she needed to do in this time period, and it's something that the current Asahina, the one here at school right now, could not do. But why couldn't she do it? As I arrived in my classroom, still wrestling with the endless questions, there was Haruhi, looking vaguely subdued as usual. Haruhi glanced up at me. How's Shamisen? Oh, that's right, that's my excuse. He's good. Huh? I sat down in my cold chair and discreetly took in Haruhi's profile. She didn't seem to have noticed anything. She held her chin in her hands, looking bored, her mouth closed. Recently, she'd been spending a lot of time like this. I didn't know what she was thinking about, and I didn't have time to give it much thought. Hey, Haruhi. What? About Shamisen. I have to take him to the vet again today. It looks like I'll have to do that a lot, actually, so I don't think I can make it to the clubroom. Sorry, but... I was positive she was staring daggers at me, but no. Fine, whatever. Haruhi looked at my stunned expression. Well, I don't want people ditching for no reason, but if you got a good excuse, I'm an understanding chief, and I won't give you a hard time about it. I searched my memory for a version of Haruhi that was understanding and wouldn't give you a hard time, and concluded that this was the first time I'd ever seen such a thing. I'll come and visit him sometime soon, so tell him I said to get well soon, okay? But I guess Shamisen's got your sister to pamper him to death too. She didn't really seem like she really cared that much. Her chin moved around, still cupped between her hands. It was definitely strange to see her so listless, but at the moment I was grateful for it. I still had to figure out the Asahina problem. Still, what was this mood? Having the person behind me quietly stare out the window was both nostalgic and strangely novel. If only Haruhi would be like this even half of her waking time. Morning, class. The morning bell hadn't even finished ringing when Mr. Okabe came striding gallantly into the room. I understood. I understood that Haruhi's melancholy would not last long. When I thought about it, this was the first concrete prediction that the time traveler had made. According to Asahina, Haruhi would drag us all into a treasure hunt, and we'd wind up walking all over the place. I'd be fine if Haruhi was like that the other half of her waking hours. For good or ill, that was enough to make me feel at ease. At lunch, I bolted down my food and hurried to the clubroom. If she wasn't in her classroom, she'd be here, I reasoned, and sure enough, there was Nagato sitting at her usual spot in the table, absorbed in reading. Nagato, how's Asahina? I was the one who had made her stay at Nagato's place, so I thought I should make sure everything was okay. Nagato turned her lower gaze up to me, silent as though contemplating the meanings of my question. What do you mean by how? Well, she's not causing you any trouble, is she? No. Thank goodness for that, I thought. I imagined Nagato and Asahina having a pajama party. My heart swelled. However, Nagato said in an even voice, she is uneasy when she is with me. Her glossy eyes dropped once again to the hardcover in front of her. I looked at Nagato silently, searching for some kind of expression on her pale face. Regret or loneliness, say.
but no such feelings were evident. I could understand Asahina's unease. Most people would probably find being shut up in a room with Nagato hard to handle. I could handle it, as well Haruhi and Koizumi, and Tsuruya would probably be fine, but that wasn't the point. Nagato had understood Asahina's fear and expressed it to me thus, so there had to be something more. It's because Asahina and I are both so constantly in your debt. She's being considerate. It's mutual, said Nagato, not looking up. I have also relied on you. But Nagato was always the one who could do something. She saved my life time and time again, I told her. When something happened, she was pretty much the only reliable one. I wouldn't say Koizumi and Asahina were worthless, but if she hadn't been around, there had been many more times where we'd all be helpless, I said. I was also the cause of many problems. Come on, those can't be helped, I told her. If she wanted to assign blame, she ought to start with the data overmind and me. It wasn't something she could blame herself for. Plus, it was thanks to that whole incident that I learned to really appreciate this reality. I got to see Haruhi in a ponytail. When I'd been able to change something, the experience had meant a lot to me. I see, murmured Nagato, turning the page. The cold winter wind blew, rattling the glass of the windows. I turned on the electric heater. What about your boss? They've suppressed the extremist faction, right? The data overmind does not have complete consensus, but the main faction still leads. Interesting. Even pure thought entities had internal disagreements. And you're connected to the main faction, right? Yes. Asakura had been a vanguard of the extremist faction. Wait, were there just two factions? Were there others? I asked. So far as I am aware, there is the moderate, the revolutionary, the compromise, and the contemplative. And they were all different. Asakura had tried to kill me in order to provoke Haruhi, but Nagato had destroyed her. But the higher-ups were still arguing about it, apparently. Just as I was visualizing the interactions of all those gods in the sky, Nagato spoke. I cannot transmit the thoughts of other factions. She slowly brought her gaze up from the page. But I am here. Her voice was perfectly steady, the very sound of trustworthiness. I won't let them do as they please. On the way back from the club room, I ran into two familiar faces. Hey, Kyon! Tsuruya waved her hand rapidly. Is your kitty okay? Said the person beside her in a worried voice. I heard you had to go to the vet. It was Asahina, the normal, native to this time Asahina. She didn't seem to know she'd soon be heading into the past. Is he taking his medicine? Oh, of course. Haruhi had called from the club room, and since Asahina had been there, she knew what we'd talked about. It's not very serious, but it seems like he'll need some time to recuperate. I shook my head lightly, a bit confused. Obviously, this Asahina looked no different from the other one. If I wasn't careful, I'd fool myself into thinking that Asahina was the one who was supposed to be at Nagato's place right now, and I wouldn't have even noticed it had happened, unless Asahina herself said something. Hard to believe Shamisen could get stressed out about anything, said Tsuruya with a smile. But I guess it's better than catching some weird disease. I bet he's not getting enough exercise. No mice at your house, right, Kyon? Sometimes we have the mice in our garden. You should totally bring Shamisen over. I bet he'd do him some good. Sure, once he's better, I'll do that. I wasn't going to take him outside while it was still this cold, but once spring came, Shamisen would probably love that. Once the cherry blossoms bloomed, Haruhi would definitely want to do some kind of flower-viewing garden party anyway. Kyon, will you be coming to the clubroom today? I have to take Shamisen to the vet again today, I said, wishing I asked the other Asahina what my day was going to contain. I already told Haruhi. Oh, really? She sounded like she really cared about the cat. Well, I hope he gets better soon. It pained me, but I gave a serious nod. Come by sometime and pet him. It'll help him get better. He's male too, after all. The two girls laughed and left to get juice for the lunches, and I returned to my classroom. Not having a heater, it was colder than the clubroom I had just been in. The only source of heat was the breath and warmth of the students in the room, and the most efficient heat source, Haruhi herself, was gone. I walked towards Taniguchi and Kunikita and joined in their conversation. Then, after class was over, I put the school behind me as soon as I could. I had plenty of time until the time given in the letter, but I was worried about Asahina being left by herself, and if I was going to follow Asahina the Elder's instructions, there were some tools I had to assemble. First, I stopped by my house and got a hammer and some nails from the garage, which I threw in my bag, then grabbed my bike and sprinted over to Nagato's apartment building. This winter day was cold enough to make my ears sting, but when I thought about Asahina waiting all by herself, I didn't really care. Plus, it was practically guaranteed that something fun would be waiting for me. It was the arrival of a scene I'd been hoping for ever since summer vacation. My strangely high spirits were the lingering results of my talk with Nagato in the club room. Come what may, Nagato would protect Asahina and me, and I wanted to protect them too. Haruhi treated us brigade members like her property, and if anyone messed with us, she'd flip out and turn them right around. Plus Koizumi, at least, could probably take care of himself. It was hard to imagine him getting tired, and if he were to falter, I can't say I wouldn't give him a hand. Haruhi would probably order me to, without regard for whether it was convenient for me or not. Not that I cared. I'd been a brigade member for just under a year, and I hadn't been ground down so much that I fold now, of all times. Whoops. I skidded the bike to a stop, letting the wheel drift out a bit for no real reason, then headed for the console in the apartment foyer. I pushed the button for Nagato's unit.
Yes?
I was relieved to hear Asahina's voice. It's me. Did anything happen? I hope not.
Oh, no, nothing happened. I'll be right down, so just wait there.
I wanted to come up to Nagato's room and relax for a bit, but Asahina cut the intercom off immediately. I stood there idly for about 5 minutes, whereupon Asahina showed up in the foyer, still wearing her school uniform. She held school slippers in one hand. She looked at me with an expression of relief, but then suddenly turned serious, shivering in the cold as she trotted over to me.
I borrowed these from Nagato. Also, here's the apartment key.
Asahina held a small key in her hand.
Could you return it to Nagato for me?
Huh? What was going on? Since she was staying for a while, couldn't she borrow both the shoes and the key?
About that?
Asahina tucked her chin down, her eyes upturned and looking at me.
I don't think I should stay at Nagato's place.
Well, why not? I asked.
How do I put this?
The winter wind tried to disturb her chestnut-brown hair. Asahina smoothed it down with her hand.
When I'm alone with Nagato, she just can't calm down.
I'd gotten the same line from Nagato. No, forget that. I couldn't imagine what Nagato would do that would indicate anxiousness to Asahina, I said.
Well,
said Asahina, as though explaining something to a small child.
It's just a feeling, really. When I'm sleeping at night, I mean, we're in separate rooms. I'm sleeping in my spare room, but it's like she's standing right beside my bed staring down at me.
Oh, come on, she's not a ghost, I said.
It's just a feeling. It's like she's conscious of me.
Asahina exhaled whitely, staring at my chest.
I don't feel it all when we're in the club room, but it's just really strong when it's just the two of us at her place. It happened last month too. When we returned from the past, I woke up and you were gone, and I just had this feeling she'd been staring at me the whole time I was asleep.
What was that supposed to imply? I couldn't imagine Nagato ever doing anything to hurt Asahina, I said.
No, I know, that's not what she's thinking. It's just an impression I get, but I know, it's like she's hung up on me somehow.
This was completely incoherent. I certainly didn't understand it. Asahina looked at me accusingly. With a lonely tone to her voice, she said,
It's like she wants to be like me.
Huh? Was my only reply.
Like, doing all sorts of crazy stuff with you, Kyon. I'm always doing stuff like that, right? But Nagato just watches. It was like that on Tanabata and during the endless summer, too.
The seal of the SOS Brigade was all over my memories of the previous year. One of them was that Nagato was always the hardest working member.
I just wonder if that's part of why she changed the past. She's always watching over us instead of getting saved, like me.
Asahina breathed into the palm of her hand, then nodded decisively.
When I think about it like that, it makes sense. What I feel for Nagato, I mean. She might want to become like me in a way.
My mind went on a wild flight of fancy. I couldn't help imagining going into the clubroom as usual and encountering a maid outfit wearing Nagato there, cheerfully serving me tea. She would smile as she poured out the hot water, then, holding the tray, ask me how it tasted. If Nagato were to become like that, I couldn't really complain. But what would happen to the Nagato who sat in the corner of the table, reading?
I think Nagato knows this herself, too. That's why I don't think I should be here. It just makes things difficult for her.
Asahina's eyes were serious. It wasn't that she didn't want to be in Nagato's home, but that she was being considerate of Nagato. We already knew what would happen when too many bugs turned up in Nagato's system, and we knew what caused them to accumulate. As a result, she'd restricted herself. No more synchronization. She was trying to avoid bugs of her own free will. Was Asahina really Nagato's ideal? A person who, unlike herself, takes action without knowledge? A time traveler, her perfect opposite. It was the ultimate irony. Asahina suffered from her own ignorance, while Nagato knew too much. I looked up at Nagato's place. Yeah, Asahina might have been right. When I thought about it, the most perceptive people I'd known had all been female, although Haruhi and Tsuruya were a little too perceptive. Nagato had her own virtues, and they weren't virtues enough. But when she herself didn't realize that, it made things difficult. If pressed about it, she'd just feign ignorance. It was also possible that Asahina was overthinking this. Nagato might just be fine as she was. She might just occasionally run out of books to read and just stare at Asahina without any particular intent. But if Asahina was worried, I would just ignore her concerns. I understand. I'll tell Nagato for you. We'll figure it out where you're gonna stay later. She could stay at my place as a last resort, but it wasn't like there weren't any alternatives. Anyway, there's something else I wanted you to look at. I got another letter in my shoe locker. Asahina looked at the letter I gave her as though it were a crib sheet for a test she was about to take.
Oh, this is...
She pointed to the very end of the directions.
An order code! The very highest priority!
I hadn't been able to figure out whether the line was a code or a signature of some kind. I asked if it was some kind of future language.
No, it's not a word. It's a code. One that has a special priority for us. It means no matter what the order is, it must be carried out.
You mean... this? I asked, thinking about the contents of the letter. What point could there possibly be in a prank like this?
That's...
Asahina began, her head cocked, confusion on her face.
I have no idea.
What would happen if we ignored this and do nothing?
We cannot ignore it,
said Asahina flatly.
Having seen that code, I must take action to ensure its execution.
She looked at me uncertainly.
And you'll do it too, won't you, Kyon?
We did as the letter said and proceeded to the location in question. Our method of transportation was a bicycle. It should go without saying that Asahina rode behind me on my luggage rack. In any case, although our target was within the city, it was still some distance on a bicycle. We killed some time wandering around. By my watch, it was just 10 minutes past 6. The letter had directed me to set up the materials I now carried between 6:12 and 6:15. I felt a little lonely, and not just because the sun had already set. The road was a bit removed from the local residences, and I didn't see much traffic. Then there was a little side path that branched off it, which was unpaved. It didn't seem like a private drive, but neither was it a shortcut to anywhere in particular, which made one wonder why anyone would go to the trouble of using it. The X on the hand-drawn map was just the intersection of that little path on the road, a few centimeters away from the edge of the asphalt. We were lucky there weren't any pedestrians around. What we were about to do was not exactly upstanding behavior. To put it bluntly, it was a practical joke. All we needed were 3 things: a hammer, some nails, and a steel can. You can probably guess what we did. Alright, I better get to it, I said.
Yes,
nodded Asahina. I'd been hiding behind a telephone pole. I jumped out, ran to the spot, and began pounding nails into the ground. The ground was pretty hard. I had to pound them really hard to get them even halfway in, but I couldn't risk risking a lot of noise and possibly catching an eye of a passerby. I was in a hurry, so I didn't think it took me more than 30 seconds, all told. I covered the nails with the can, then hurried back to the telephone pole, where Asahina awaited. We then found a darker place a bit farther away in which to hide. So what was going to happen? I was really interested to see what effect this prank was supposed to have. And I didn't have to wait long. It was 6:14. Opposite the street from where we hid, a male-looking silhouette came walking along at a leisurely pace. I could tell he was wearing a long coat and carrying a shoulder bag. He didn't seem to notice us. He seemed to be looking down as he walked. He didn't seem particularly cheerful. Suddenly, he stopped. He was looking directly at the empty can. I heard a sigh. Just when I was wondering if he were the type to take offense at litter, he lined up a kick, with perfect form, and directed it with all his strength at the can. Of course, the can did not go sailing between a pair of notional goalposts. In fact, it didn't move from its position at all. The man clutched his foot and fell to the ground. Oh, what the hell? Oh, it hurts! He was literally rolling around on the ground, apparently in intense agony.
Fuck! Ah! Who did this? Ah!
Asahina and I looked at each other. Had this been the objective? Who knew? We had a silent exchange of glances, then nodded in unison and emerged from the darkness, walking along the path as though just happening to pass by.
Are you alright?
Asahina asked of the man, who lay face up, holding his foot in his hands. I casually stood next to Asahina, looking down at the man, who continued to groan.
Huh?
The face was distorted with pain, and I didn't recognize it. He was a slender man in his 20s. Underneath his long coat, he wore a suit and tie, and he looked like a regular working stiff. Need a hand? I said, my conscience torturing itself. Yeah, thanks. The man took my hand and stood, wincing as he stood on his other foot. Ah, shit, who would pull a childish prank like this? Yeah, who would, huh? I squatted down and picked up the can. It had a huge dent in it. The nails had been knocked diagonal, too. This guy really had taken a serious shot. Jeez, that's dangerous. I tried to sound plausible as I kicked the nails out of the ground. Thanks to the man's kick, they came out pretty easily. I slipped the nails in my pocket to conceal the evidence. The man raised a lowered leg several times, each time wincing and clicking his tongue. Ugh, what a pain. Doesn't seem like it's broken, though. Maybe I twisted my ankle? Said Asahina.
Maybe you should go to the hospital.
Ugh, yeah, you're probably right. The man hopped towards the edge of the automotive traffic-bearing road, teetering dangerously as he approached. Here, lean on my shoulder, I said, coming alongside him so he wouldn't fall over. Shall we call an ambulance? No, it's okay. I'll just call a cab. Don't want to make a too big deal out of this. I hate to ask, but could you help me over to the main road? Sure, yeah, of course. No matter the reason, this was my fault, after all. I really wanted to apologize. The man held on to my shoulder as he hopped along. From what I could tell by the light of the streetlights, he seemed pretty good-looking. I'm kind of at a dead end in my job, he said apologetically as we were midway crossing the street. My own goddamn fault for thinking that kicking a can would help me clear my head. Oh man, I just get what I deserve, don't I? No, I think it's the fault of whoever asshole set the prank up. Yeah, I guess. What kind of nasty little punk still does that kind of shit? He looked back and forth between Asahina and me, who was tottering along behind us, and smiled slightly. She your girlfriend? After being at a loss for how to answer for a couple seconds, I replied, kinda. I lied. Hey, why not? Okay, said the man simply, before his face returned to the pain expression. We reached the intersection and had the good luck to be able to quickly wave down a passing taxicab, helping the man, who'd broke into a cold sweat despite the temperature, into the back seat. Thanks, guys, and sorry again. It really was us who should have been apologizing. But this Asahina was completely innocent, so if he ever found out the truth and came to settle the score, I'd hope he'd take it up with Asahina the Elder. As we bowed and backed away from the car, Asahina asked me a question.
Is that all we have to do?
Asahina hugged herself and sighed, discomfited. It was 6:30. There was an important restriction on us. It was this. I could not allow Haruhi and this time's Asahina to see future Asahina and me together. If it were just Haruhi, I could probably figure out some kind of excuse, but it was hard to imagine that present Asahina would write off seeing an identical copy of herself as a mere look-alike. And if it were to happen to bump into the entire SOS brigade on its way home from school, that would be the worst disaster. But according to future Asahina, she'd never seen her doppelganger during the last 8 days, so it stood the reason that we were able to walk around without worrying about it. But there was no way to know whether something might go wrong, and if my hard work in the present was being reflected in the future, then I'd still have to make a special effort now to ensure that future, so I couldn't afford not to take the situation seriously. Could I? I had no idea. Why do these things always have to be so complicated? If the Asahina that had traveled back from the future had only been Asahina the Elder, instead of the one from 8 days in the future, things would have probably gone more smoothly. I regarded the small upperclassman at my side. Her North High uniform-clad body looked stiffened by the cold. It probably wasn't much fun braving a windy February night without so much as a jacket. Like her, all I was wearing was my school uniform, and I was freezing. Shall we go? I said, gesturing towards my parked bicycle. Asahina nodded, replying,
But where? To your house?
I desperately wanted to do exactly that, but somewhere with fewer tattletales would be better. As her older brother, I knew better than anyone that my sister's mouth could open faster than a grandma's wallet when said grandma was trying to spoil her grandson. We'll go somewhere else who will let you stay with her. Someone besides Nagato. I doubt she'll ask any questions, if I know her. I got on the bike and gestured to a confused Asahina to do likewise, whereupon she sat side saddle on the luggage rack and off I went, carrying my light schoolmate behind me. The spot where I stopped my bike would have been familiar to any SOS Brigade member, including Asahina.
This isn't...
She hopped off the bike and looked up at the gate in front of the residence. I flipped down the bike's kickstand and locked it up. This person will absolutely help you out. She'd never fail to come to your rescue.
But we can't let her know.
You just leave that to me. Beside the gigantic traditional-style gate, there was a single modern touch. An intercom. But before I pushed the button on it, I had to work something out. Asahina, your ear.
Okay.
She obediently tilted her head, brushing her hair back to reveal her perfect ear. I couldn't help but remember when Haruhi bit down on this same ear. I wanted to do the same thing, but now I knew full well that this was neither the time nor the place. Right, so this is what I'm thinking of doing. Asahina's eyes went wide at my widespread explanation.
But I don't think I could do that kind of acting.
She protested with a quivering voice.
That's too hard.
Indeed it would be. If she really had to act, that is. But I knew there would be no need for that. All Asahina had to do was be herself. Nobody would ever notice. Anyway, just do that. It'll work out fine. Trust me. I smiled optimistically, then hit the intercom button. Asahina and I silently waited for a reply. There was only a slim chance that the person I was trying to reach would reply personally, so I rehearsed the exchange over in my head. I was on my third run-through, and had waited close to a minute, when I started to darkly suspect that, surely not, nobody was home. But just then,
Hey now, wait there!
An energetic voice echoed from beyond the gate, followed quickly by a thunk. The great wooden door creaked open.
Hey, Kyo Mikuru! What are you doing here all this about? Is it just the two of you? My, don't you make a couple. I'm practically jealous,
said Tsuria with a broad smile. Tsuria's clothing was rather different than her usual school outfit. She wore a casual kimono with a traditional short jacket, her long hair tied artlessly back in a bun. It matched the old-fashioned Japanese garden perfectly. Letting us into the Tsuria state grounds, she then replaced the square timber that kept the great gate locked.
Still, this is really rare. Kyo and Mikuru out for a hike in the freezing cold? Without Haruhi on even?
There were some, extenuating circumstances. Actually, Tsuria, how'd you know it was us at the gate? I'd heard only silence from the intercom after all.
Oh, yeah, there's a security camera above the gate. It's super easy to tell who's there. When I look, I saw you two, so I figured I'd better come out to see ya. Was that okay?
Tsuria's wooden sandals clacked against the ground as we walked along the shrine-like path that led to the main wing of the house. She smiled.
Mikuru, you don't look well. Are you alright?
Actually, about that, I said, clearing my throat. We've got a favor to ask. Could you let Asahina stay at your place for a few days?
Huh? I mean, sure, but...
Tsuria chuckled as though something had occurred to her. She peered at Asahina's face.
You are Mikuru, right?
Asahina looked surprised, at which Tsuria narrowed her bright eyes. Had we been found out?
Anyway, it's fine. Is there some kind of problem? Like one stopping Mikuru from going to her own house, I mean?
The conversation was moving right along, thankfully.
How long did she need to stay, do you think?
8 days, at the most, I said. 8 days from now, Asahina would revert to being the only Asahina in this timeline. Is that okay?
Sure, I don't mind. Oh, right. She can use the apartment. It's a separate building, kind of like what we have at the mountain villa. No one's living there right now. I think it's just a little studio. Sometimes I go there to think about stuff because it's so nice and quiet.
I looked around the grounds that surrounded us, which you could only pretty much just call a forest. Who knew what was hidden in the expanse? I heard there was even an old-fashioned storehouse somewhere in the area. As I felt a strange combination of admiration and envy, Tsuria's mouth curved up into a perfect half-smile.
So, anyway, Mikuru, what's up? You don't have to be so
Before the silent Asahina could say anything, I quickly cut in. She's Asahina's younger twin sister, Michuru. Twin? Michuru? That's right. They were separated at birth, you see, and, wow! And there was some different circumstances, and Asahina, what I mean is, Mikuru doesn't know she has this younger twin. Oh! So why is Michuru here wearing a North High uniform then? Ah, shit, I didn't think about that. How should I put this? Michuru here wanted to sneak into North High to catch a glimpse of her sister, so she got a uniform, but then she wound up not being able to pull off her plan. Then she happened to bump into me, and I got her to tell me the story. And after that, Sudia patted my shoulder. Don't worry about it, she said with a pleased grin. No need to explain anymore. If she's Mikuru's sister, she's practically Mikuru. She only needs a place to stay. Also, you've got to keep her a secret from Asahina. Oh, but of course! Said Asahina, as though afraid to being left out of the conversation. Is this really okay? Sure, it's mega okay. Right, Michuru? Come this way. I'll show you the apartment. Sudia took Asahina's hand and dragged her off through the garden. As she went, Sudia looked over her shoulder and shot me a broad wink that just killed me dead. The apartment was very similar to the mountain villa we'd been invited to earlier. According to Sudia's explanation, the villa had been built using this apartment as a model. This was the original. It was a pleasant Japanese-style one-floor building. Asahina sat politely on the tatami mat floor, like a pretty French doll placed in a simple house. The room was warming up, thanks to Sudia having turned the heater on, and strangely, I didn't really want to leave. After explaining the hanging scroll that hung in the alcove and telling us where the closet and the futon and the sheets were, Sudia made herself scarce, saying, I'll bring us some nice hot tea. Looks like this is gonna work out, I said to Asahina. Yes, thank goodness. We'll need to properly thank Sudia, agreed Asahina Michuru. Michuru, was it? That's a nice name. She finally smiled. I stretched my legs out on the tatami mat and looked at the heater, thinking about Asahina's name, until Sudia returned, carrying a basket filled with a kettle, some teacups, and some clothes. Sudia invited me to stay for dinner, but if I were away for home for 2 nights running, my mom would probably get irritated, so I instead expressed my sadness at having to go home. Thanks to finally having found a place for Asahina to stay, I was suddenly tired. If I dithered around anymore, I'd wind up deciding to spend the night. She's like Mikuru, yet not Mikuru. Or like, she's not Mikuru, but she seems Mikuru-ish. I told Sudia I thought I'd already explained she was a twin. That's true, we'll just leave it at that. Walking about a step and a half ahead of me, Sudia headed for the huge gate. As I watched her loose bun of hair gently sway, a question occurred to me. Sudia. Yeah? How much do you know? You said before that Asahina and Nagato, that the members of the SOS Brigade weren't normal. Yeah, I guess. My long-haired schoolmate bounced slightly as she turned around. Her smiling face was as bright as a star. I really don't know that much, Kyon. Just that they seem kind of different. At the very least, they're not normal like you and me. Even if that's all she knew, that was more than enough. Yet she still hasn't asked any inconvenient questions, and she hasn't tried to figure out what Asahina really was. I just really like watching people have fun. Like when someone gobbles down a delicious meal I made for them, or when they get to watch someone they've never met having a great time. I really love that. Yeah, so when I watch Haruhi, it makes me really happy. It's like, I don't know, just like having that much fun, you know? Didn't she want to join in herself? I asked. Wasn't it lonely just watching? Yeah, you know, I think movies are super cool, but I don't really want to make movies myself. Just watching is enough. Or like when I watch the World Series or the Super Bowl. It's like really fun to cheer and stuff, but I don't start thinking, oh gosh, I wish I could get out there and play myself. Watching the players be there, giving it their best shot, is the best part. I mean, I wouldn't be any good at it, so I do just stuff I can do. In a way, she was the exact opposite of Haruhi. When Haruhi saw something she thought was interesting, she just had to butt in and give it a try. Sudia's big eyes cast about. The SOS Brigade is just like that baseball game. I get a kick out of watching you, Haruhi, Nagato, and Koizumi, whatever it is you're doing. Her smile and voice were completely genuine. She was speaking words of truth. I started to feel cheered up just by standing next to her. So I really like the position I'm in. I think Haruhi understands too. After all, she doesn't try to drag me into things, you know? 5 people is like just the perfect number. She turned back around with another bounce, facing the gate once again. It's totally impossible to figure out everything, you know? My hands are already full. She looked over her shoulder at me. Hang in there, Kyon. The future of humanity's riding is on your shoulders. The corner of her mouth twitched a couple times, and she regarded me for a moment, but soon she was unable to keep herself from breaking into giggles. The guileless, childlike laughter made me feel like my merry upperclassman's words were a simple joke. Tsuria gasped for air, holding her stomach. Anyway, make sure you always watch Mikuru's back, but no funny business, you got that? That's the one thing that's not allowed. If you're gonna play tricks, play him on Harunyan. I'm sure she'll forgive you, totally. These words, I was sure, were meant sincerely. I don't know why I thought as much, I just did. Not that I had any intentions of doing anything. I said goodnight to Tsuria and pedaled off my bike, but it wasn't long before I found myself applying the brakes. Good evening. My path was blocked by someone standing alone in the gloom of the street. You're certainly working hard. For my part, I can't say I agree with involving Tsuria, although that's surely the safest place she could possibly be. I hadn't seen Koizumi's handsome, pleasant smile in 2 days. Hey, what a coincidence meeting you here. Well, you could say that, yes. You could also say that the coincidences started when you and I first met. No, even earlier than that, when you met Haruhi. Koizumi raised his hand in greeting and began to approach me. How long has he been skulking around in the night streets waiting for me? I asked. He wouldn't have any cause to complain if someone mistook him for a pervert and called the cops on him. Koizumi chuckled softly. You seem to be up to something interesting again, but I suppose I haven't won the participation lottery. I chose to sigh, exhaling whitely. This is my and Asahina's problem. It's got nothing to do with you. You should just run along and hunt those celestials of yours. These days they never call. They never write. Sometimes a man just needs to get out and take a walk. The only people that were out at this hour without a dog to walk were writers stuck for ideas, I said. And I knew for certain running into them was no coincidence. If this were a coincidence, one could hardly be blamed for thinking it was just a little too perfect. What do you want? I asked, but immediately changed subjects. Nope, never mind. That much I can guess, more or less. How much do you know? You mean about there being 2 Asahinas? Koizumi casually mentioned to the crucial point. How did you manage to explain all that to Tsuria? Twins, I suppose? Surely you didn't tell her the truth. Not like it would have mattered. Maybe not. It is Tsuria after all. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Just what kind of person was Tsuria anyway? Our cheerful schoolmate seemed to know everything about us, yet was still keeping her distance. My superiors have warned me not to interfere with Tsuria. Koizumi's face became slightly more serious. She's actually not related to this. Originally, we weren't supposed to encounter her at all, but there was a mistake somewhere and we wound up coming into contact. That's Suzumiya for you, I suppose. What mistake? Where? Was he talking about Tsuria being in Asahina's class, I asked? Or her being a substitute player on the school baseball team? We do not interfere with her. In exchange, she is no more involved with us than necessary. Those are the rules by which the agency and the Tsuria clan conduct their relationship. He should have just mentioned an absurd inside story like that, I told him. Koizumi chuckled. To be clear, the Tsuria clan is among the many sponsors of their agency. However, our activities may be irrelevant to them. They are entirely indifferent to everything we do, which is fine, since it's frankly more convenient for us that way. But Miss Tsuria is the successor of the entire clan. Tsuria, you... I thought. To think we just casually hung out with a person like that. Now I really wanted to know. What the hell was she? I asked. She's an ordinary high school student. She's a second-year student at the same public school we attend. She just commutes from a bigger house. Meanwhile, she might be fighting the forces of evil somewhere, or she might have solved some intractable problem. But none of that has anything to do with us. The words Tsuria had just recently spoken now were clear in my memory. She'd said she was happy not being too involved with us. Maybe the same was true for us, not her. It would definitely be best to just keep relating to her the way we always had. Whatever she was doing, none of that was important. Just as Haruhi was Haruhi, Tsuria was Tsuria. She was Asahina's cheerful, happy, over-perceptive friend. The SOS Brigade's faithful advisor. That was the best way to think about it. How much of a coincidence had her meeting Asahina been? Were there parts of the past that were mysterious even to time travelers, in the same way that Haruhi was a mystery to them? And then I remembered. Koizumi, earlier you said things with Asahina would work out just fine. What did you mean by that? I mean that the future can be changed. Then, as though he predicted my next question, he continued. You might be thinking that people from the future regard the past as freely changeable and consider the future to be superior to the past, but the future is actually quite a fuzzy thing. If you knew past history and could travel back, You could change the future however you wanted to. I'd done it myself. I'd gone back in time with Nagato to fix the world after I'd gone all wrong. Koizumi smiled. You could have also done the same thing from the past. If you'd known the future in advance, you could have changed it right at that point in time. How could you possibly know the future? That's impossible. Do you really think so? Koizumi's smile turned a bit devilish, surely on purpose. The guy really could be pointlessly nasty sometimes. I'm an Esper, though my abilities and range are a bit limited. But can you be sure that I am the only one? I don't mean anti-celestials like me. How can we say for certain that there aren't more straightforward superhumans with, for example, the power to see the future, perhaps even attached to the agency? His smile returned to his previous pleasant state. I don't recall ever telling you that such individuals don't exist. You son of a bitch. Of course, I never told you they did exist either. Well, which was it? I asked, adding that he'd better not tell me that could go either way. To be completely honest, I don't know. As I've said before, I'm an underling. I don't know everything. Asahina's the same way. That much I could believe. Never had an agent been so deserving of pity as Asahina. There's a purpose for her ignorance, of course. If a time traveler from the future knows they are acting with a defined iteration, they can simply analyze those actions, and they'll never take actions that would jeopardize their own future. The reason Asahina seems so careless, despite being from the future, is because she doesn't know anything. You could even say she hasn't been allowed to know anything. That's the future's countermeasure to stop us in the past from analyzing their intentions. Her presence is required in this time period, but if we were to infer the future from her presence, that puts the future in danger. In a way, you could say she's a perfect time resident. I don't feel any threat from her at the moment, and when push comes to shove, I'm sure she'll follow her orders exactly. Koizumi performed the specialty, the shrug. That might very well be the aim of the future group, to make the people in the past think that, which is why the agency doesn't get involved. It'd be awfully irritating just to play into their hands after all. We don't want to be puppets of the future. So what, did they oppose Asahina? I asked. Well, I wouldn't go that far. If I had to sum it up, I'd say we're at a standstill. A chill ran through my body. Literally. Let me make an analogy. Suppose there are two nations, A and B. They oppose each other, but have not engaged in direct conflict. Now suppose there appears power C, which opposes A, and power D, which opposes B. From A's perspective, coexistence with C is impossible. They are a direct threat. The same goes for B and D. C and D then join forces and begin cooperating. If one nation was intolerable, the two joined are now all the more so. Now, as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So A and B build a grudging and unsteady alliance, which is where we are. Koizumi regarded me uncertainly. Are you listening? Oh, sorry, I said, throwing my leg over my bike seat. I stopped listening when you started talking about D or whatever. I can remember the first three, but then after that was too much. I know it was audible. Your brain chose to listen and process, or not. He didn't have to answer so seriously. I was just messing with him. Would it kill him to play along for my joke, just once? He'd never be popular with the ladies without a sense of humor, no matter how good-looking he was. Koizumi grinned. I wondered how many different smiles he had. I change my expressions and statements to match the situation and the individual, just like everyone else does. But when I'm talking to you, it always turns in this kind of conversation. Wow, it must be hard to be you, I said. Well, I feel the same way, but I think I'll stay like this for a while. Koizumi looked off into the distance for some reason. I hope the day comes when we'll be friends on a perfectly equal footing, and we'll be able to laugh about the past, just as people, when things like mission and duty no longer matter. He seemed satisfied by that. Well then, I'll see you in the club room. He raised his hand in a sort of salute, then strode off into the darkness, as though lazily continuing his evening walk. Upon returning home, I wolfed down my dinner and immediately shut myself in my room. The first thing I did was to phone Nagato. I had to tell her that I moved Asahina to Tsurya's place. Knowing Nagato, she might as well already know. Even Koizumi had figured it out, after all. After 3 rings, Nagato picked up. She didn't even bother saying hello, proof that she already knew who was calling. Nagato, to me. I'll make this short. It's about Asahina. I gave her the highlights of what Asahina told me. Nagato listened to my explanation with her usual silence. Understood, she said, without any particular regret, adding,
That is for the best.
Really? Well, that's a relief.
Why?
Why? Even I had misgivings about relying on Nagato too much, and this time we unilaterally decided to impose upon her, then unilaterally left. It was really selfish of us.
Needless worry, said Nagato, her voice calm. I can understand her position.
Then, after a short pause,
I do not wish to become like her. However, sentiment to that effect is valid.
Valid how? I wanted to know.
If I were in her position, I might have come to the same conclusion.
So, that meant that Nagato could imagine being in Asahina's place, and worrying about Nagato in the way that Asahina currently was? I asked. There was silence for a while. Then,
I think so.
Her fine voice reached my ears. It was such a pleasant sound that I wished I would have turned on the phone's recording function. We exchanged a few more words, whereupon I hung up. It seemed that there was no need for me to worry. The alien and the time traveler had come to a mutual understanding, probably more than either of them realized. For some reason, I grinned and looked to my side. Shamisen was sleeping on my bed. His head was on my pillow as though he were human, his breathing deep and even. Just as I was wondering whether I should shave a patch of his fur off in case Haruhi did happen to turn up, something else occurred to me. How long do I have to lie about Shamisen's recuperation? I'd forgotten to ask. Asahina should have been able to tell me how many days I skipped club activities for, and when I started coming back. If I knew that much, I'd been able to set up a tentative schedule for this week. But the Asahina from a week in the future didn't have a cell phone. If I wanted to call Asahina, I'd have to call Tsuruya, but thanks to that conversation I'd had with Koizumi, I hesitated to contact her. I didn't know how much of what he said was true. Since it was Koizumi we were talking about, he might have just made up something plausible sounding to see my look on my face. Hell, I'd rather that were the case. I aimed the air conditioner's remote control at the cooler, reclining back into my bed. Tomorrow, I'd check the contents of my shoe locker and figure out the day's plan. As I regarded the calico cat, whose eyes were shut as he smacked his lips, I wound up drifting off to sleep myself, only to be awakened by my sister, who had just gotten out of the bath.